Okay.
All right. Bill, can we starting our meeting? We roll call, please.
Certainly, Trustee Rubin.
Here.
Trustee Hallwax.
Here.
Trustee Mealopoulos.
Here.
We have a quorum present.
Right. Very good. At this point in the meeting, I'll simply ask if, let's do the minutes first. Could I get approval of the minutes for that? I'll second it. All those in favor?
Aye.
At this point, I'll ask if there's anybody that would like to address the committee. Good time to do it. Hearing and seeing none. We will go on. But first, let me just say thank you all for being here later than than usual. So in advance, thank you for that.
Okay, on tonight's agenda, we will go through the October treasury report rather quickly. And the CIP program updates, we don't have too many there. And then we'll spend the majority of our time this evening on the draft budget. Okay. Just a few highlights from this month's treasurer's report. Property taxes are still higher than prior year to date by about $2 million. We're at about 71% of budget. We have not had any receipts in September, October, and nothing in November yet, which is surprising. I would expect to see that come in any day now. But the bills are, as many of you are aware, I know from discussions, the bills are out. And we are expecting to see payments for that pretty soon, if not by December 1st. If we back out, last year's payments were still about $273,000 ahead of last year. Our sales taxes this month were lower than last year and the monthly budget, but they're still higher year to date than what we were anticipating. We are seeing these level out, but they're leveling out at a level that was much higher prior to the change in law. So we do think that this is probably the new norm at this higher level, which is good news for us. This was a strong revenue month. We had a number of revenues, both higher than last year and higher than monthly budget projections. Places for eating, income tax, utility tax, building permits just went wild this month. They did really well. MFT use tax and our water sales as well. The water fund, debt service fund, MFT, and capital projects fund are all performing as expected. One thing I want to note is that on Thursday night's agenda, you will see the debt service payments. This is the second installment for 2023, which includes the principal payments. So there's about $2 million that will be coming out of the bank account. Because of the timing in property taxes, we will likely have to temporarily loan the debt service fund about $500,000 to make those debt service payments on time. But I do think that will all level out by the end of December because we should have all the property taxes that we need to make those. So internally, that will just be an operational issue for us. But the projected revenue and expenditure surplus, when we're looking at revenue and expenditure together, right now, current numbers show general fund surplus of $1.5 million. We're just doing really, really well. Our revenues are outperforming much higher than we anticipated. We also had several capital projects that were delayed, which is leading to that surplus. The water fund, similar story. Also looking at a surplus, we have a 62% fund balance there. Again, due to bond issues. On the inflationary impacts, happy to report there's no new items. We're just continuing to deal with those issues that we've outlined already. And now I don't want to steal Stella's thunder, but we had another record-breaking month at the golf course, so I will hand it off to her.
Thank you. We did have a great month in October. We doubled our budgeted revenues. Our rounds year to date are 9,000 over budget, so another great year. We did go through a recertification with Audubon International. This was a video recertification with taking someone throughout the golf course and showing them all the work that we've done. So we have been recertified. We have to do this every 3 years. And the Clubhouse Design Review Committee has a design model that they're going to present on Thursday, so we'll see more about that then.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stella. Okay, moving right along to our CIP.
Good evening. Your CIP update can be found in the packet on pages 55 through 57. My very quick updates for this evening is that the unit number 40 dump body and salter will be received in November instead of October. I think it's still on schedule since last week. The replacement of the public safety chief's vehicle was delivered in November instead of December, so that's good news. And then the replacement of number 3, the step van, it will finally be outfitted in December 23 instead of October. There was some issues with supply chain items from what I've heard, and so hopefully we'll see that before the end of the year. Do you have any questions?
Moving right along, I'm going to kick things off with the budget discussion.
You want me to start? Well, first of all, welcome everyone. Got more folks in this meeting than we typically do on a Tuesday night of board meeting week. As the whole village board joins for our overview of the draft calendar year 2024 budget. I know Trustee Scott is still planning to get here. She is running late. She has an appointment that is running longer than expected. But she will be here soon, and Trustee Hallwax is joining us via Zoom tonight. Before we get started, because there's a couple of faces in the room that perhaps maybe you may still be learning those faces. We have our new public safety director, Sean Loughran, who many of you, all of you were here last month, so you had a chance to meet him. Monica Sarna is our new public works director over here. She jumped right in to final budget preparation. Her first day was the 23rd, and I think her first meeting was a budget meeting. So both of them have the benefit of really great support staff who did a lot of the legwork of getting the budget into a very sound position in the first place. And we were able to onboard them just in time to really kind of get the final budget into the format that you are seeing, and seeing it tonight and as we will discuss it. I just wanted to point out those folks to all of you. Tonight, we will go through a budget summary and overview. It'll be somewhat slightly revised from what we have done in the past, in that we will kind of focus on some of the highlights of each of the department's operating budgets. We're going to spend some pretty significant time on the CIP, our community investment program, both the 2024 projects as well as looking out into that 10-year window, and talking a bit about the work that we're going to do in the coming year to refine that. We will get started with the budget summary and overview, where we will talk through revenues, the fee and fine analysis, and other recommendations. Before I hand it off to Nikki, we'll just talk through a couple of major factors that are impacting the calendar year 2024 budget. This year marks probably one of the largest single years of capital investment that I can recall since I've been here in the last 10 years. Much of this is this $21,020,000 is driven by the work that will commence at the golf course relative to the clubhouse project. We will talk about that at several points this evening. But it is a big year of investment across the entire community and organization. And so we will walk you through what all that means and answer any questions that you may have. We've talked about inflation and supply chain disruptions pretty much every month for the last 24 plus with the Finance Committee and with the full village board. We do continue to see those pressures being applied as we work through the things that cost the village money, whether we're talking about contract support, whether we're talking about capital investments. Unit prices, commodities are all more expensive than they have been. And while we did get some relatively good news today relative to CPI holding at about 3.2, that definitely isn't translated across all areas where the village spends. And so that is something we'll talk briefly about. We are continuing to see those delays as well in vehicle and equipment orders. And again, that's something we've been talking about quite a bit. Some operating budget changes. I think probably one of the more significant changes is in the structure of the budget itself. There is no longer a separate village manager's office operating budget and a separate finance department operating budget. Those two have been consolidated into one, into the administration and finance department. We will walk you through some of those things. This is something I've been talking about with the village board for over a year now, and that we've been working on internally for longer than that. That provides some pretty substantive changes in the way those functional areas will interact, and importantly, provide some additional resources toward areas that are continuing to be significant areas of need in the organization, specifically human resources and information technology. So we will showcase that as we go through this. And then development services, which typically had been for probably the last 60 or so years, a function of our public works department. When Dave Mao announced his retirement, we started having conversations about making some changes to that structure. And so we now have a formal development services department, which is headed up by Taylor. He'll be talking a little bit later about some of the initiatives that that department is undertaking. But that aligns much better in terms of the customer service opportunities and internal service changes that also are provided by that reorg. We have allocated cost of living adjustments for our unrepresented non-union employees in this budget, as well as for AFSCME, which is in the last year of a 4-year contract collective bargaining agreement. That's our public works operators and mechanics. We are in the process of negotiating with our FOP union, which is the public safety officers. The cost of living adjustments for non-union have been included at 3%, which is again aligned with AFSCME. And we have allocated some resources in the budget relative to the FOP. And we are continuing, as I said, to negotiate that contract. And I hope we will come to a conclusion on that soon. And then special projects, just a number of things that are going on, and I won't spend much time talking about these individually because we will talk about them later. But this gives a bit of a look under the hood in terms of a number of significant programmatic things that we'll be looking at, as well as some of our medium to long range planning that is really going to have a significant impact on us as an organization and as a community. Again, we'll talk about those as we work through the budget. I wanted to also mention, though, contractual service arrangements. And there was a time where simply looking to find means of outsourcing certain functions was an almost immediate means of finding ways to save resources on an annual basis. We are starting to see continued upward pressure on some of those contractual services costs, to the point at which we are going to analyze one of them in depth, and we've already begun the process of analyzing and making recommendations on the other. And we will talk briefly about that as we move through this, as we move through the budget presentation. I'm going to hand it to Nikki, who is going to walk you through really kind of the high-level overview, and then we'll start diving into the nuts and bolts.
We'll head right into the numbers. If you are following along here or if at home, someone's watching, the budget summary starts on page 73, runs through page 80. Our total operating funds, excluding our pension funds, have a budget of $43,457,570. And the expenditures is $53,545,000. At first glance, I think what's glaringly obvious here is that our expenditures are outpacing the revenues. Something that I want to clarify right up front for everyone here and anyone at home is that the budget as presented is in accordance with the village's balanced budget policy, in which our operating revenues are covering or exceeding our operating expenditures. That's required on an ongoing basis just to make sure that we can sustain our operations. The expenditures as presented in total and aggregate here are including one-time capital expenditures that are strategic, either drawdowns of fund reserve that have been incorporated into the long-term financial forecast, or they're spend down of bond proceeds that have been aggregated for this purpose. So you can see that actually within the financial forecast, which we'll go through in a few moments, that our operating expenditures actually exceed our operating revenues actually exceed operating expenditures. When we include pension funds in that equation, the numbers jump to 47.8 million in revenue, 57.9 in expenditures. We don't spend a lot of time on these two funds because we quite honestly have very little control over them. They're statutorily controlled. The benefits that are granted through the pension funds are all outlined in statute and granted through a separate body, through the fire and police pension fund. So we will touch on that a little later as how that relates to the rest of the pension or rest of the budget document. Going into the one-time use of reserves for capital, what makes up that roughly $10 million difference? There is a one-time use of reserves in the general fund of about $3 million. When we go through the 10-year CIP, you'll see all of the detailed projects that makes up that $3 million. The motor fuel tax fund reserve, about $164,000. Reserves in the motor fuel tax fund are deliberately aggregated for this purpose. They're either used for engineering or planning for road projects or road projects themselves. Typically what we've done in years past is aggregate those funds every 3 years. We do a large project and draw that down for road programs. So when we get to the motor fuel tax fund, Monica and Don will talk a little bit more about what's planned for that. The golf fund reserve, that budget includes a drawdown of $1.4 million. This is unrestricted fund balance. So this is above and beyond what is set aside for dollars that are still owed to the village. You'll recall that we're forgiving that outstanding loan over a 10-year period. So kudos to Stella and her staff that have aggregated this much in reserves above and beyond what they owed us. So obviously a very successful year for them. Use of bond proceeds in the capital fund. This is the largest since I've been here and since Phil's been here. About 14.5 million that'll be coming out of bond proceeds for bond issues that we'll be issuing next year, and also leftover bond proceeds that have already been issued. This is a remaining authority from the 2021 referendum. We'll be issuing $3 million in GO bonds. If you'll recall, that referendum was $10 million. We issued 7. We still have a little bit left from there, and then we'll be issuing the remaining 3. Plus, we have another planned issue for the golf club of $7 million. So we'll be drawing on that and the remaining bond issue from the golf club that we issued this year as well. Moving on to the 10-year CIP program, we've talked a little bit about this and we'll dive into this into detail later, but I just want to highlight on a large level, this year's 10-year program is $77.4 million with 21 allocated to this year. That is significantly higher than what we had last year. And again, we'll dive into the reasons for that. With that $10 million bond issue, we've taken a look at what we are planning for water infrastructure improvements in the out years. Based off of the water main bid results that we've seen recently come in much higher than anticipated, understanding that PVC pipe is much higher than it used to be, the materials associated with that and the labor associated with that are much higher. we're trying to take a much more realistic look at those out years and what those costs may be. Those have been adjusted upwards, so you'll see about a $5 million increase over 10 years as a result of that. And then we've also taken a look at some of the planned improvements for the water plant as well. So that's also driving that number up. If you go to page 73 in your budget, I'm sorry, this is a little small on this screen, but you'll see the full scale chart. This chart shows just the far right of that. Moving from left to right, we have all of the audited fund balances in the budget book, not on the slide. As of 12/31 of 22, what we are projecting in terms of revenue and expenditures this year, and then where we anticipate our fund balance to land. Now, some of these are a little conservative, a little outdated because we did these year-end projections probably beginning of October. So fortunately, we've seen more positive results since that time. And then what the budget revenue and expense is, and then what we would propose the fund balance would be if the budget today went forward and everything happened as though we projected it. One thing that I want to point out, moving from left to right, if you look at the general fund line, we're projecting that fund balance to end around $17.8 million. If we add in the budgeted revenue of $23 million, the drawdown expense of 26, you'll see that the budget as proposed draws down that $3 million. That's largely capital, that dollar amount. So even though it does look like a surplus, that number represents capital. Going down in that column, if you look at that, the line right below that, you have about 3.4 million that you're drawing down in capital projects. I know I just said that we have about a $14.5 million capital plan, but also included in that number going left to right is a general fund bond issue. So you have that $10 million in revenue that's offsetting that capital plan. So we're really digging into fund reserve by 3.4 million for projects in the capital projects fund. Looking at this chart as a whole, really either drawing down on capital reserves or drawing upon bond proceeds in all of our major funds: general fund, capital fund, water, golf, MFT. Really those that are not drawing down are the pension funds and our Washington Employee Special Service area, which is essentially self-sustaining. Drawing attention to the chart on the right, just one thing that we want to point out, if everything were to happen the way we hope it will, our general fund will end the year with just over 6 months of fund balance in it, and the water fund will have just over 7. And again, that is by design, aggregating those reserves to offset general obligation bond resources to use those fund reserves for capital infrastructure and investment over the next 10 years. As a whole, looking at the breakdown of revenue in the budget, you can see the general fund is the lion's share of that $43 million, largely property taxes, and all of our state shared revenues flow through the general fund. The capital projects fund is next in line in terms of size. Obviously, this year was slightly unusual because we are issuing $10 million in bonds, which is reflected in that number. The water fund is a distant third when you compare that large scale at 9.48% of revenue. And then looking at the expenditure side of things, again, the general fund is the lion's share of the expenditure side. This is where the majority of our personnel, commodities, supplies, services, pretty much everything it takes to run the village day to day that's not related to the water fund, our capital projects that are funded by bonds, and the golf fund, it all resides in the general fund. So no surprise that that's the largest piece of the budget, because that's really the largest part of what is running the day-to-day operations. Second to that is the capital projects fund, which this year is obviously just indicative of a $20 million capital program. So no surprise there that that's about 27% of what makes up the expenditures as a whole. And then the water fund, that accounts for our personnel that run the water plant, all of our personnel that maintain the distribution system, plus all the capital that is required, capital expenditure to maintain all of that. So we do have some significant expenditures there this year, and we'll talk about that as part of the CIP. So those are kind of the top 3 areas where we're proposing to spend money this year. Moving on to the financial forecast. This starts on page 25 in the budget, and it runs through 44. We talked about the financial forecast in great detail last month, so I won't take you through it page by page. But this is an important part of the budget because it does drive the foundation. We take careful consideration in the 5-year forecast when we are looking at what we are requesting for the current year proposed budget and how that will impact us 5 years out. Obviously, when we're drawing down on general fund reserves, or any of our fund reserves, we want to make sure that those requests are sustainable at least through the next 5 years, if not longer. The main factors affecting the forecast, many things that Phil has already mentioned. We've talked a great deal about inflation, supply and commodities costs. You will see that throughout the budget, that those numbers have been adjusted for what we are seeing today. Obviously, the prioritization of infrastructure, you'll hear a lot about that tonight. Adjusting for future state budgets and just the unknowns that may come from that, and trying to contingency plan as much as we can. And the logistical challenges that we discussed earlier as well, just the delay in vehicles, delay in equipment, the difficulty in obtaining some of our supplies, particularly at the water plant. Also, we talked a lot about during the financial forecast, debt financing for infrastructure needs. This is something we have to revisit every year. This was part of the strategic plan goals that were set forth in our current strategic plan, was not only identifying the capital needs that we have to do over the next 10 years, but how will we pay for them sustainably. Obviously, those needs change, which is why we redo the 10-year CIP every year. But that has also been rolled into the budget, and we'll talk about that as part of the 10-year CIP, specifically of when we are anticipating bonds with what we know today, understanding that that may shift every year. We're also designing fee structures around cost. Margaret will get into this a little bit later in much more detail, but we did take a deep dive into the fee and fines this year. Staff spent a lot of time looking through the village code just to make sure that we have everything accounted for, and also that we're recovering as much cost as we can in our operations. On the revenue side of things, this starts on page 29 of the financial forecast. This will walk you through each of the revenue projections in great detail. The most important or most significant in terms of share of overall revenues is the property tax levy. As we discussed at the last finance committee, and as you will see on Thursday night's agenda, we're recommending a 5% increase in the property tax levy. That is the maximum allowable levy this year under the property tax extension limit, despite the fact that the December through December inflation number was 6.5%. So that's really to cover the increases in costs that we're seeing just from staff to services to supplies to equipment. Sales taxes, as we talked earlier, they're projected stable throughout the forecast, relatively stable in this budget because that's what we're expecting. Income taxes are projected to increase while our personal property replacement taxes are projected to decrease. As we discussed at last month's finance committee meeting, there was an allocation error that was discovered at the Illinois Department of Revenue. For anybody that was not here last month, the Illinois Department of Revenue was over allocating to municipalities their share of personal property replacement tax. So that revenue's been doing very well this year. We expect that to roll back significantly next year. But at the same time, they were over allocating or under allocating to income tax. Unfortunately, those won't cancel each other out. But we will see a small increase in income tax and a significant decline in PPRT next year. Telecom tax and use tax are projected to decline throughout the forecast and in this budget. That's consistent with what we've been seeing. Telecom tax has kind of been dying off for years. And that change in law, as much as it's benefited us with sales tax, we'll start to see that use tax drop off. Utility tax, building permits, alarm fees are all projected to be relatively stable. Places for eating taxes are projected with a slight increase, with hopefully our soon-to-be new restaurant coming in. So that's been factored into the budget. And then the water charges, we'll talk about this more in a moment, but as we are increasing our expenses on the infrastructure side throughout the 10-year CIP, we also have to consider that in the water rate. So we've developed an internal model, and we'll talk about in a moment what we plan to do with that long term. Motor fuel, and lastly, motor fuel tax is projected to decline. Our local fuel tax, small but mighty, performing very well, very consistent. But our share at the state level, we do expect that to decline with the increased use of EV vehicles. Any questions before? Okay. Please stop me if you have any questions along the way. Moving on into financial policies, this start on page 46 of the budget, run through page 58. We discussed these in detail at the Finance Committee meeting in August. The updated versions are in the financial policy section of the budget. Biggest change, and probably the most significant in several years, at least since I've been here, is the move to a 25% fund balance target in the general fund. We are hovering above that. We continue to hover above that. But as you see in the financial forecast, the 5 years, we are planning to continue to draw down that fund balance for capital. I'm pleased to report that through the 5-year forecast, we will still be able to align with that 25% goal, even in year 5. But again, that assumes that everything we're assuming is correct. So we will continue to reevaluate that every year. But the good news is the current reserve is in excess of policy. The property tax levy, I already noted that the CPI increases 5%. The other part of the property tax policy, it includes the abatement of property taxes associated with the alternate revenue, GO bonds. We issued water bonds in 2020 and 23. The village does have the ability to abate or basically cancel the property tax levy associated with those GO bonds. We have by policy and by practice always done that, and we pay that debt service back through the water funds. So we are proposing to do that again this year. It's a nice thing that we can do to reduce the property taxes that are passed on to the residents. On the pension funding, I know I mentioned this a little bit earlier. Our police pension required contribution that's included in the budget. You'll also see the formal recommendation from the pension funds on this Thursday night's agenda. The required contribution is just over $2.7 million. It's a 2% increase, much milder than what we have seen in the past. It's only about a $56,000 increase. I would love to tell you that this is due to strong performance of investments or the impacts of our pension funding policy, but the reality is that it is based off of a reduced staffing level in public safety. So one thing I want to caution and what we've put into the financial forecast is we expect that contribution to ramp up over the next 5 years as we get back to full staffing, which I'm hoping is going to be this year. We are expecting that pension contribution to track with that. So now we'll have full staffing, we'll have 4 FTEs more than what we did last year. That pension contribution will ramp up accordingly. The fire pension contribution still remaining the same for our last remaining beneficiary in there. That will be the same throughout the 5-year forecast and obviously in this budget. If there's no questions on policies, I'll hand this over to Margaret to talk a little bit about our fee and fines.
Thank you, Director Larson. So this evening I'll be presenting the fee and fine schedule analysis, which you can find on page 60 through 71 of your budget book. The budget book has some nice detailed charts if you'd like to follow along and look through the categories that are in the book. So as part of the annual budget development process, staff reviews all of our various fees, fines, and charges for villages services. And in previous years, as well as this past summer, staff distributed a fee survey to surrounding communities to collect data that would allow staff to analyze and compare the fees, fines, and charges that staff assess to those of comparable communities. Staff also reviews the fees, fines, and charges compared to the actual costs of services. And based on the review of the data this year, for the calendar year 2024 budget, we have proposed a number of increases and we have 2 new fees proposed as well. So I'll go through each of these categories and you can follow along with the budget book. So for our water rate increases, we are recommending that the volumetric rates and fixed charges are increased by 7%, as Director Larson mentioned earlier. This is in line with the recommendation that's included with our water rate analysis and also based on our planned capital improvements. This increase also takes into consideration some of the delayed distribution system updates that we've had previously that we have to move into future years. Related to our sanitary sewer rate, which is going to increase or proposed to be increased by 5%. This is to meet the cost of mandates that are being pushed out from the Illinois EPA and MWRD. So there is $3.9 million in scheduled sewer related infrastructure improvements over the next 10 years. And we'll be discussing this later in the budget presentation. The general collection service fee is due to increase by 5%. This increase is consistent with the tax extension limited version of the 12 months change in CPI that is used for the property tax levy. For motor vehicle stickers and motorcycle tags, we're recommending that they increase from $50 each to $60 each for the vehicle sticker. That would also affect the senior rate, which would increase from $25 to $30. And then motorcycle tags would increase from $25 to $30 as well. This fee has not been raised since 2016, and these fees better reflect the costs associated with administering the program and also aligning it with surrounding communities and what they've been charging. Related to water connection fees, the Public Works Department, they issue flat water connection fees based on the type of connection and the size of the service line. And staff is proposing a progressive rate increase for all categories, which would be calculated as the village's cost of materials plus 15% to cover administrative costs. The one exception in this category is that the village water system connection labor fee, which is currently a flat fee of $100, is proposed to change to $300. Staff also recommends removing the water rate for use in construction purposes because this fee is no longer being utilized. Looking at building and other permit fees, the main change for building permit revenue or related to building permit revenue is that there's a significant, that the building permit revenue is a significant annual source of, it's 7% of our revenue for the general fund. The cost of third-party plan review and inspections has increased significantly over the past 3 years. And so the proposed increase to the new dwelling building permit fee per square foot with basement square footage is going to be 3% for this year. As you'll remember, last year was one of the first years in a while we had increased it. That was by 10%. So this year is 3% to just continue to cover costs. Yes, sir.
I know we're limited as to what we can charge in terms of how that can be calculated. You can't just charge what you want because we're not home rule. That said, is that 20 cents a square foot, given all I've heard about the increased third-party costs, our change in staffing, our change in compensation levels and everything else, could we not justify a larger increase based on our actual cost? And if so, shouldn't we? It still seems to me like, given new home prices per square foot, this is nothing. So as long as we're still within the realm of capturing our costs and we're not stepping over that line, we could probably justify a significant increase from that.
And I had the exact same thought where there was nothing really that we were seeing. I mean, 3% is so modest that I saw absolutely no rationale for keeping that kind of number down. I don't know what the limits are in terms of, if we wanted to go much higher. But certainly, construction costs, everything is escalated at such a high rate. Why are we at 3%?
I think it's dual purpose, right? So, right now, I think the permit revenue is projected at 1.5 million, maybe? I'll take a look. In that realm. And the budget for development services is about 900,000. So we are covering that cost. Now, there are other costs outside of the development services that are not included there. So I think we have to be careful as a non-home rule unit that we are justifying the costs associated with the permits and that we are close. The other piece is that we want to be careful about not pricing ourselves out of the market. We have done some surveys that do need to be updated and will be evaluated in the coming year as part of the work plan of what would it cost to construct a building in Glencoe versus Winnetka versus, our other surrounding comparable communities. And we are kind of creeping up on the higher end there. If this body is comfortable keep going to continue to go up, that's certainly a guardrail that we could remove and take a different look at it. But I think historically, we've tried to remain somewhat competitive, that if you do have a residence that's looking generally in the North Shore, I want to build a home, and they're picking the town, we do historically have tried to remain competitive there. If you don't think that's an issue, that would kind of change our perspective a little bit.
Nobody's buying a house or picking a piece of land based on what the building fee
It is so
is.
very, right, that is not right.
But on the other hand, to the first point, are those direct costs or are those fully loaded with overhead?
I would say more direct costs, not overhead.
So
So I don't think where we're
Quite a
at
different
is
number.
unreasonable. I don't
Yeah,
think
quite a
we're
different.
overreaching.
Plus a third party.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's
The
where
third
I
party's
think
in
it's
there.
really creepy now.
The third
but-
party's in that number that Nikki quoted. I think that, and we talked a lot about this, frankly, given the fact that there was a substantial increase in 2023. We wanted to be somewhat cautious about where those costs ultimately are going to go. And we'll talk about this a bit later. One of the components that we have seen is a significant increase in those contractual services costs. We're going to look at that during the course of this year to evaluate whether there are other areas or other ways of providing those services, either a mix of in-house and outsource or pulling it back in-house. We made this recommendation based off of some of the updated numbers that we saw in 2022. We do sit at a level where I don't want to guess too much at this, but a new single-family home permit in Glencoe is probably in the neighborhood of $55,000 to $60,000.
It depends on the square footage, anywhere from $25,000 to $70,000.
Yeah.
But average $40,000 to $60,000.
Yeah.
What if we went, I'm just making up a number, what if we went to $750 instead of $735? How much would that increase the building permit cost?
So that would be a 5% increase. So
I mean, we could, that's less than what inflation was.
Last year.
It's not, so.
Oh, you like that? You like that?
35 cents, 75, yeah.
So what if we did that? We're not going to get, we think it's legal, notwithstanding the home rule issue. And it's just sort of matched inflation. And yes, we had a big jump last year, but that was because we hadn't done anything for a zillion years.
Well, and again, this is a number that fluctuates year to year. So what is the total revenue impact of that? To some degree, it's hard to say
We
because
don't know.
we don't know what we'll see in terms of new home construction.
Here's something I can say about it. It's not residence property taxes. So,
Yes.
and that is
That is true.
maybe good.
That is
So-
a one time.
Yeah, well, you know, we're gonna look, we'll continue to look at it and this is a lovely community. You don't have to pay an initiation fee, but it's kind of like an initiation fee. And, you know, getting here with all our great staff, what have you, okay, costs a little more.
So is that, I guess we'll just straw poll it. Obviously, nobody's voting on anything tonight, but is there general consensus around the table? Because we can make that update between now and December when you actually consider the budget.
Yeah, I would have gone a little higher, but I can go with your 5.
I mean, the philosophy is fee for service, and we look at the rate of increase in our consultancy in this area, it's really much higher. It's a different, slightly related issue that we want to bring up, it's the whole idea of the impact fees. But that's another discussion.
Well, and that's a good point. And impact fees are something as a non-home rule unit of government, we can't levy.
Right.
We can levy them because the state statute accommodates them for schools and park districts, but they don't accommodate them for us. So that is to your point, there is perhaps a impact that we will feel for a much longer time than just the period while that home is under construction, that other units of government are able to adapt to a little bit differently than we.
I'm sympathetic to Gail's idea because this isn't property taxes. But we don't have the data on like other communities, and we do not want to be an outlier where our costs are higher, although I sort of agree with Gary that that's probably not going to make the decision.
I will say where we are today, and I think where the board seems to be pointed, will probably keep us within that top 3 number. We have been in the top 3 for really the last 7 or 8 years since we've been looking at this closely. The top 3 being Kenilworth, Winnetka, and Glencoe. And sometimes we move depending upon the size and scale of the property and the build. And we all assess building permit fees a little bit differently, but that's why it's not as easy as just looking at building permit rate for new construction, because a lot gets thrown in differently. But again, if 750 is the number, we can work through that. If you want more discussion on that, we're happy to continue.
So I sort of feel like we don't have enough data now to go more in Dale's direction. And I don't know that we need to do it because, it's totally defensible at 750. And then, okay, we're still here. We'll keep looking. And if the numbers should be higher for whatever reason next year, it's still not property taxes.
We can incorporate that into the final budget document. So you'll see that in December, before you in December.
Good. Very, very helpful comments from the trustees. We got us do the right thing.
So I'll continue on with some other permit fee increases. We're suggesting increasing the pool drainage permit for discharge into the sewer system fee from $50 to $100. The exterior property maintenance administrative fee, which is currently $75, we're proposing that this fee changes to the village's administrative overhead cost, would be added to the $75. And then we have 2 new fees, which are the tree replacement, pardon me here, the tree replacement fee for non-heritage trees at a rate of $175 per caliper inch. And for a heritage tree, $350 per caliper inch. And this recommendation aligns our language in the village code to the fee schedule. And then also, there's a revision fee for approved permits. We currently, when we have additional changes to a permit, we are going to pass on the cost of $150 plus $150 per hour after 2 hours of review to cover the additional costs from the third party when they're reviewing and approving a permit that's already been approved. So we're going to make that change as well. Moving on to the electrical vehicle charging stations. So to remind you, last year we switched to a dynamic schedule where we changed the fee schedule to actually say that between 25 cents and 50 cents per kilowatts, we could set the price based on the actual utility costs for the electricity for those charging stations. After monitoring that through this year, we have noticed that the cost of electricity has increased and fluctuates. And so we are suggesting that the per kilowatt hour would be changed to market price of electricity in order to cover the cost of the usage. And then this would be adjusted monthly after each receipt of each utility bill. So it would still be kind of a dynamic pricing schedule. We would just say market prices. We have a bigger range we could charge from.
Go back to the building permit, we reviewed fees. I didn't really see her, whether we have inspection fees or not. I know some permits have inspection deposits and whatnot, but do we charge inspection fees? And if not, well, whether we should or not is a different, but do we charge or think about charging re-inspection fees for those that?
Yes, and Taylor would be happy to speak to that.
Those are typically part of the permit fee. We do have the discretion to charge a re-inspection fee for something we considered an excessive number of re-inspections. If somebody's failing and failing and failing, or calling and calling and calling and rescheduling. Our typical fee is $150 an hour for that, or $150 for an inspection.
Okay.
But typically, your standard number of inspections is part of your permit fee.
But the re-inspect fee we charge.
That's right. If it's considered excessive, then we can have that.
And who's doing those inspections? Is that a third-party contractor
It
that
depends
we're paying?
on, it depends on who it is. Building, plumbing, electrical inspections, a third-party contractor. Engineering inspections are done by village staff. Health inspections, third-party contractor as well. Fire inspections are done by Glencoe Fire. So some are in-house, some are.
But all the third-party ones we're paying for.
That's right.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
I will say the structure of our fee structure accommodates that. We built that in to our per square footage number when we designed the fee structure the way that it is. So it is anticipated and covered by, intended to be covered by that, by the way it's designed.
Thank you. So lastly, we have the Glencoe Golf Club rates. We have recommended increases for the driving range Eagle and Birdie cards by $2 each, adding a driving range park card. Rental clubs have increased by $5 and premium rental clubs have been eliminated. Permanent tee time costs have increased, and all of this is detailed in your budget document on page 64. There's a large number of fees there. Also, Stella utilizes dynamic pricing. So based on the need and time of day, we can adjust those fees as needed within these ranges. Are there any other questions about the fee and fine schedule?
So Stella has had total input in all these golf carts. So basically, though it looks like we're holding all the normal tee times and the normal fees are flat.
The basic rate is flat,
Okay,
but we have the
okay.
ability to go up based on demand. With the
Okay, so
dynamic
that's
pricing.
what the range is, right?
This may be a good point before we continue through. Trustee Scott came in. I'm not sure if you need to grab something to eat. The food's in the room next to us. If everyone's good, I just wanted to make sure that we accommodated that before we start into the operating department's overview. Okay.
All right, heading right into it. Okay, so heading right into the meat of the operating budget, the department budgets start on page 86. These charts represent our operating and our capital expenditures in our three largest operating funds: general fund, golf fund, and water fund. These are summarized by category on page 77 in that budget summary tab, but then all of the detail is page 86 and after in each of the department narratives. Once again, general fund, we're looking at a $23 million budget. That's split between the 4 operating departments that are in the general fund, the new Department of Administration and Finance, Public Safety Department, our Public Works Department, and our Development Services Department. Public Works, largely that number is a large percentage there. You can see there are a number of capital projects included in that budget that we'll talk about a little bit later. The golf fund is just over $3.5 million. I do want to point out that does not include the clubhouse construction. That's in the capital projects fund. So the only capital project that's included in that budget is the driving range netting, which is about $3 million. The rest of that is what covers the operations of the golf course. And largely from an operating revenue versus an expense, as we've heard from Stella, is relatively self-sustaining for the golf club outside of capital. The water fund is just over $2.7 million. Again, that includes not only staff, services, supplies, commodities, equipment, but also all the infrastructure, the water plant, the water distribution system, water meters, everything together. And that's split between water production, obviously the water plant, and the water distribution and all of the mains and the maintenance that goes along with that. Heading right into the operating department, administration and finance department, the proposed budget for this is just over $4.7 million. The proposed FTEs are 14 full-time employees in this department with 2 new proposed positions, as Phil mentioned earlier. And we're just going to touch on some of the major operating items that are included in this year's budget.
So I'll be going over the first 2 items, the vehicle license program and the alarm permitting software. For the vehicle license program, this is the vehicle sticker program. The administration and finance department and the public safety department are using this as a joint goal for 24 to implement in calendar year 25 to create a virtual vehicle sticker program. We will be evaluating our current software that we use in the public safety department to see if it has the capability to be used in a different manner to create this virtual vehicle sticker program. And then staff has already started looking into also other third-party softwares and applications that might be used in addition to what we currently have to make this a very easy and efficient program for the end user, so that it won't be a difficult process for them going forward. For alarm permitting software, it was the finance department's goal this year to purchase and implement an alarm billing software. This is for the process of permitting people that have an alarm in their house. And then also when their alarm goes off, they have occurrence charges based on how many times their alarm goes off. It's a climbing scale. So if it's like over 3, they get charged for it if it's over 6. And that's to cover the cost of our public safety officers that respond to those false alarms. So it was our goal, and after.
Can I interrupt for a second?
Absolutely.
Do people get charged if it's not a false alarm?
No, only false alarms.
It's like the NFL.
Yes.
Very good. And so we were looking into a vendor that we thought could be a good solution this year. After further digging, we have a very manual process right now, and the software was not going to alleviate those manual processes that we have currently, where we have to take data from public safety out and put it into a financial software to do those calculations, to issue those bills for those occurrences and for the permits. And so staff has already started looking into a new software that specializes in alarm billing, and we've rebudgeted this initiative for 24 so we can implement it and make that process much smoother.
Moving to the next set of points here, Phil touched on the enhanced resources that we're budgeting for human resources and IT next year. What we have included in the budget proposal is 2 new full-time employees. One is a human resources generalist position that will provide HR support, and one is a support and networking engineer that will provide IT support. Both of these positions are intended to reflect the organization's continuing growing needs in both of these areas for both day-to-day operations as well as proactive measures, whether that's user training on the IT side, employee training on the HR side, and continued development of the people of our organization. The next is a diversity, equity, and inclusion partnership that's abbreviated DEIB with a couple of our surrounding communities. And the concept that we're planning for in the budget is a partnership among likely three of us, three communities, to share the resources of a consultant to help assess and evaluate our policies and procedures with an eye towards continuing to operationalize diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in the day-to-day operations of the village. Very much consistent with the village's values around being a welcoming and inclusive community, but then thinking about how that then applies to the actual operations and working of the village. The next is a negotiation of a successor agreement with AFSCME. That's the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. That's the bargaining unit that represents our maintenance equipment operators, mechanics, and water plant operators in the public works. We have a decades-long relationship with the AFSCME bargaining unit and have been through several iterations of the contract, and the current will expire at the end of 2024, so this is a renegotiation of a successor contract. And then the next item is continuing our public safety officer hiring processes. The Public Safety Commission this fall has commenced a new entry-level hiring process that we'll continue using along with our lateral applicant hiring process to fill the vacant positions in the public safety officer rank. And we will also conduct a new lieutenant promotional testing process next year. By way of background, the Public Safety Commission is the body that is responsible for the hiring of public safety officers and the promotion of lieutenants, and they do so using lists that have been created through civil service processes for both of those positions. The public safety officer list is good for up to 2 years. We typically don't get that much life out of a list. And the lieutenant list is good for 3 years, so our lieutenant list will be expiring next summer.
Moving right along, you will see in the water fund budget that we are commissioning an updated water rate study. As we mentioned earlier, what we are seeing as we look 10 years out is that the cost to maintain our infrastructure, to maintain our water plant in a good operating condition is increasing. And we have changed a number of items that were assumed in the original 2017 water rate study, most notably the repair of the Skokie Lagoon transmission main that delayed the relocation of our water tower. That's a significant capital expense that was moved out of the 10-year window. We've also had a number of water main segments that have swapped around in terms of order and importance. Also in the water fund budget, you'll see some significant investment in leak detection, both listening devices throughout the distribution system, and then also equipment that will help us locate that may change some of the priorities that we have in the 10-year plan. So it's important for us to take a look, second look at those, a deep dive in the infrastructure and the rate structure to support those. So you'll see a budget to engage in a consultant to start that process next year. Right now, staff is using an internal rate model that we developed that's effective for right now, but we want to make sure that we have a third party to come out and just verify that for us.
Given the percentage of water generated that's not paid for, do we at this point have a high level of confidence in the new metering system, and that all the new meters that have been installed are not a material contributing factor in that loss, and it's actually water not getting where we want it to get?
Alex, you want to weigh in on that?
Yes, we have a high level of confidence in the new meters installed, that they are registering accurately. And the difference between the master meters at the water plant versus the ones in the community, it is legitimate water loss.
Okay.
And the master meters are tested.
Correct.
This question doesn't necessarily matter, but is there an estimate of like per month, the amount of water that is being lost?
Per month, It kind of varies depending on the season. I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but it can vary from as low as about 15% to about as high as 35%.
So it's not insignificant. Okay, thanks.
Correct. It's substantial.
So that's a great question, actually, Joe. And that is one of the reasons why the leak detection system was originally planned for 3 years, and we've accelerated the timeline on that to try and pinpoint where that's happening. This is one goal that's annotated. You'll see this on each of the slides with a footnote. A number of these goals are joint department goals, so you'll see some of these repeated. So I just want to note that there'll be a number of folks working on this together. The other initiative I wanted to cover is local adjudication program. As some of you may remember with our home rule discussions, this was something that we did not have a whole lot of authority in when we first did the home rule discussion. In 2023, there was a public act that was passed that enhanced the non-home rule unit of government's authority to have a local adjudication program. So one of the things that you'll see in the work plan for both administration and finance and in public safety is to examine this next year to see if it will make sense to adjudicate some of those offenses locally. This wouldn't include moving violations or any criminal offenses. It would be more local ordinance violations that would allow us to recoup some funds that maybe we don't chase after now. If we have local ordinance violations like lawn mowing or code violations, those are things that we can administer either locally here or jointly with another community at a lesser cost and a higher success rate typically than you would see if you went through the court system. So that'll be something that we're evaluating next year.
Now, we had that in the past,
Long ago, we did.
because I was an adjudicator.
We haven't Well, it hasn't been in place for about 11 years. Yeah, it's been about 11 years. Dudley was one of the adjudicators, yes. We had a few volunteer adjudicators. The program, we would seek to structure the program differently to make sure that.
They were qualified.
Most of them are. But as I understood in this, the program stopped before I became village manager. As I understood it, not Dudley, but there were a couple of others, I think after you came through, because I don't think you were in the last bunch of adjudicators.
Yeah, I wasn't very long.
Yeah, there were two adjudicators who, again, both lived in the community, volunteered for the role, and frequently would not attend. And so then the adjudication responsibilities fell to staff, which is not really a great way to structure a program when staff is the one writing the violation and adjudicating whether or not there's an actual violation. So when that last adjudicator moved out of town, the program kind of stopped. It really was focused, and correct me if I'm wrong, it really was focused on parking ticket violations almost exclusively. Yeah, I think it was exclusively parking tickets. Yeah. Again, because we were so limited in what we could adjudicate locally, and since the statute changed, that's really given us some new opportunities with that.
And also very limited on what we could charge.
Correct. Yes.
So we want to talk briefly about the strategic plan. The update to the strategic plan starts on page 19 of the budget. But in there, you'll find notes on the staff progress on the different village current strategic plan, which is the one that was originally approved in 2019. Originally, it was intended to cover 4 fiscal years, but since been extended twice for a couple of reasons. One of which being that we anticipated a new plan in 2023, but following the seating of 2 new trustees in May, as well as the turnover of 2 key village positions with Sean and Monica, we decided that it made more sense to extend the plan and take that up in 2024. So we are anticipating a new plan in 2024. The budget includes funds allocated to take on that effort in early 2024. And you'll note that within the update, we've included notes on some items that they should be considered to roll over to the new plan, considered to be included in the 2024 strategic plan. Also touching on the oversight of the clubhouse design and construction. This is a CIP project, so we'll talk about it a little bit later in the presentation. It's also, denoted there with the footnote indicating that it's an interdepartmental project. Monica and Stella are obviously heavily involved in leading the charge on that project, the design and all the way into the construction, as are Phil and I in trying to oversee some of those pieces. This will be a topic at the committee of the whole on Thursday to review the schematic design, which is the progress checkpoint of the work that the ad hoc design review committee has done thus far. And after that, we'll be working through the design development phase, which will really bring all of that to final decisions on things that can take us into construction documents, approvals, and working toward construction. We do have a goal of breaking ground in mid-2024. But know that we will only get through partial construction in 2024, that the project will wrap into 2025.
First, I commend you all for the goals. Everyone is going to be very busy and challenged, and so every day should be very interesting when you come to work. I should be bored. But in all seriousness, I'm wondering, I'm not worried about the allocation of funds to do things. I'm worried about, do we have, even with the slightly expanded staff plan, do we have enough people for this to be realistic? And again, I throw that out because I'm not the one doing it.
Yeah.
Y'all are.
So when you say this, I think
Well,
you're
I'm
pointing
thinking
at
about the strategic
You're pointing at some of the
plan
strategic
and all the different things that are listed, plus all the different things that are referenced further on, that we're gonna do this, and we're gonna.
Yeah.
And I'm amazed. I mean, it's fantastic, but is it realistic?
It's a great question, and one that everyone in the room at the staff side of the table appreciates recognition of. I would say we do anticipate that when we sit down to talk about the strategic plan, one of the struggles with the current strategic plan was its depth and breadth. I think we need to look at it in a shorter window, probably a 3-year world. And I do think we have to be a bit more realistic. And when I say we, I do mean me, about what we can undertake through the course of the next 3 years. The work that we're talking about in these several slides that we're going to be working through over the next few minutes are things that are, again, have been in process or are underway or will get underway during the course of the year. It is ambitious, but I think workable based off of the initial conversations that we've had. I do think some of these are significant. I would say the last 2 bullet points on this page are not are very significant projects, right? They will require a great deal of oversight. The clubhouse process is underway. It's going well, but it is already, we're already learning that the timeline has been ambitious and is eroding slightly. We know we want to be under construction by next year. We'd like to be under roof by the end of next year so that the winter can be used for outfitting the interior spaces of the building. So there are certain projects that will take some precedence. But it is true, I will say, we also look at things like the strategic plan, this partnership with surrounding communities, the water rate study as less fully staff driven and consultant assisted. So we are not doing all of the work of creating the plans themselves or doing the analyses themselves, but more so administering the process. So that, again, we can utilize that information when we're sitting together a year from now and talking about the 2025 budget. A lot of these pieces become kind of the foundational points for what we know we're going to have to do in subsequent years. So it is a very good question. And as I said, I'm sure a lot of people in the room were glad that you asked it. But it is, I do think these to some degree are not things that we can delay either. When one of Sharon's significant lifts next year is again going through this promotion and eligibility list for public safety. These processes are immensely time consuming. And yet, if we don't do it, we've got nobody to fill those ranks. So to some degree, it's crank turning to make sure that we're prepared if somebody retires or somebody leaves, so that we can make sure we have those names and we can continue to move through that process. So unfortunately, some of it is significant in terms of workload. I do think it speaks to why we've moved into a restructured environment, why we're adding some resources into that restructured environment. I think we don't talk about it in great detail in here, but a lot of the underlying need is also IT related. And so the work that we know our IT team, and Ron is sitting in here, and the next time we all meet together, he will be happily retired. And has done the yeoman's task over the last 15 years of putting us into the position that we're in right now, which is strong and secure. And he will hand over a very strong and secure system to his successors. But that job, and he'll be the first to tell you, is only getting harder. Today was easier than tomorrow, which will be hard, and the day after that will be harder still. And so I think we know that there are kind of underlying needs throughout that are going to continue to challenge. But I think these are programmatic things that we know we have to do.
Touching quickly on that last bullet point, the oversight of the second floor living quarters and council chambers renovation, 2 CIP projects that we'll again touch about a little bit later. But these are things you've been introduced to in the last couple of months. We talked in September about the committee of the whole, about the council chambers, and then separately you guys toured some of the facilities upstairs to get a feel for that project that's coming. We're currently now working through some preliminary schematic designs for the public safety living quarters. We are phasing these 2 projects together and kind of starting to present them together because we know that those spaces are going to be needed to complete one another. So we anticipate that we will have to stage some of the public safety living quarter operation in the council chambers. We can complete that project, get those folks moved back in there, and then complete the council chambers. And be able to kind of strategically put those 2 things together. So we are working, diligently to make that possible in 2024. I serve as kind of a key role in project managing that project along with our facilities manager, Chris Cowett. That was a new FTE last year, the facilities manager, and he's already quickly proving his worth to be a huge help in suggesting and managing and leading those projects along with us. But again, this is an interdepartmental project that we're working on between administration and finance and public safety. Staying within the department, I know it's later on the agenda, but we wanted to take a second to talk about community grants now because budget-wise, it fits into that department and fund. So Community Grants Committee reviewed all the applications it received. They're on the slide there for you guys to view, and met on November 1st to hear the presentations from each of those applying organizations. Serving on that committee was President Rowan, Trustee Rubin, and Trustee Scott, and they all participated in that meeting. After hearing the presentations, they have their deliberations and ultimately are responsible for making a recommendation on what will be granted to these applicants. Those are up before you tonight, and the committee is recommending $157,500 be allocated for these purposes, which represents an overall increase of $14,000 since the calendar year 2023 budget. A placeholder is included in the 2024 budget for $145,000. So depending on what this committee determines the direction to be, the draft budget will be amended accordingly to kind of do that. We are seeking consensus from the finance committee on, what they want to, do with these recommendations so that we can make sure that the December budget includes the actual numbers and the whole process will be approved as part of the actual budget, the not the final budget in December.
For, supporting the other units around the village, so everything looks good to me.
Joe, any thoughts? About the community
No,
grant?
I think they might have told you. I was fortunate enough to have Margaret and Nikki walk through this with me. But no thoughts specifically on this or anything else.
So, thank you.
We'll update the budget for December.
Ladies and gentlemen, so I have the opportunity to present you some points regarding the operating highlights for public safety. We're looking at a total of 43 full-time employees for a total budget of about 11 million, just shy of 11.6 million. Before I go into the details, I did want to say thank you very much, Deputy Chief Purley, for working on those specific details. It's highlighted by Phil with us coming on, the two new hires coming on very late in the game. I don't want to betray any confidence, but Andy did say he wants to work on this from now on. There are some bleed over points from my predecessor who spoke to, so I don't want to repeat any additional information, but we'll talk about some specifics regarding starting with the body worn camera program. So for everyone's information, organizations, or communities, counties, villages, towns that are less than 50,000 in population are not mandated to have body worn cameras until 2025. We're well ahead of the program. And so a benefit of that is, of course, being able to evaluate and understand what pitfalls could arise, what issues could arise as well, too, especially impacting personnel budget. And so that's one of the main things we're looking at right now. We're constantly evaluating that. What we're finding as we're going forward is two principal data management and FOIA responses. For reference information, FOIA response has a limited amount of time for response. So that obviously it's not just as simple as a redaction of details from a document, but you have to watch all videos at a 1-to-1 rate, often several times over, to make sure that software that is redacting information that should be redacted, or tiling out identities, that sort of stuff. So that is very complicated. So we're finding going forward that is something that we're working our way through. Another point to discuss is, or to mention, is the evaluation and replacement of our fire squad. So typically, there is a lifespan for all those vehicles, as all of our fleet. So an internal, very aggressive task force is formed, and looking at for a potential build out, looking at all the opportunities for what we want to look at as far as not just ensuring that the vehicle, if we were to receive a vehicle very soon, which is it's going to meet our needs today, it's going to meet our needs a decade out. So that's what we're looking at. And just for everyone's consideration, if we were to decide to make a purchase today, delivery of a vehicle is a minimum 24 months out. So there's significant, and not necessarily not just supply chain, but also there's a limited number of vendors that it's a very, very specialized vehicle. And just by looking and back in the envelope math, every single agency in the surrounding area is also in the same situation. They're all looking to always constantly update their fleet as well. So now that complicates things further on other municipalities, states, and so on and so forth. So that we just looked at those opportunities yesterday and explored a number of different options, and we continue to do so. We are always evaluating the department staffing to ensure the top tier service is available. And that, so for consideration in budget, where we project a decrease in overtime as we new hires, that also directly results in an increase in training costs, because we're trying to make sure our staff can be the trifecta. They can be the police officers, firefighters, paramedics. So then again, we can have that interoperability. The reason why a lot of the overtime was because of specialization, and we just didn't have that interoperability. And then lastly, we're going to continue with the aggressive public safety officer recruitment. So we're using that through a number of different venues, of course, social media being the most common and the most functional. We've also explored new avenues through specific organizations, professional organizations, again. And also, believe it or not, word of mouth is also very, very powerful. With our current most recent hiring drive, we already have 35 applicants, which is pretty good. Better than average, though, and again, it's not closed yet, but still on the drive forward. And then the other points that are on this list here are repeats, so I don't repeat the information. Any questions?
Question?
Sure.
This is kind of a long-range thing, but the village is doing a comprehensive plan, and one of the sort of findings of the plan is that we're aging. Many of our residents are getting older, myself included, and that's going to have an impact on our emergency services, I think, in a really big way. As a matter of fact, I don't think we had very many fires last year at all, but I think we had, 600 EMT calls, something like that?
Yeah, the national, we run about 1,300 fire calls a year, and that includes fire and EMS calls. And the national average is about 64% of those are ambulance rated. And our local call volume trend, we're actually a little bit lower than the national average. We're in the 40% range for ambulance calls.
Yeah, as we were looking at an aging population, we thought there'd be more demand for their services. The other thing I want to highlight, I had a chance recently to work with people in family services. And I know that they're starting to work more closely with the police program. I think that's terrific.
Thanks. Yeah, that's to your first point. Yes, I last time I reviewed the census data, I think where the median age for Glencoe, I think is the highest. I think amongst all other communities. I think to your point, and all the more importance in making sure we can stretch the interoperability and make sure everyone can respond, because your first response is likely going to be a police officer who's on the street who's also cross-trained to be a paramedic, which is ideal. And really beyond the size of the village, if you got any large rifles, you can have that success. Right at that sweet spot.
Great.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you.
All right, for Public Works, our budget is actually split over two funds, the general fund and the water fund. So from the general fund, we have 28 full-time employees with the budget about 8.85 million. And from the water fund, we have 13 full-time employees with a 6.15 million budget. I'm going to start going over the first three budget items, and I'm going to share with Don. I've only been here for 3 weeks, so I have my staff with me to jump in to tell me if I've misinterpreted something. But all right, so the first one, project oversight and data development. As Nikki kind of talked to, we have updated some of the 10-year projections for our water infrastructure costs. And I think what we're seeing is that we really need to take a closer look at our 10-year CIP in regards to infrastructure, and look at ways in which we can approach it better and create more efficiencies. One of the main tools we're going to use in doing that is our GIS data. I always say, GIS is a really significant, strong tool, but it's only as strong as the data that's in there. So garbage in equals garbage out. We want to make sure we're working with good data. So we're going to make sure that we're confident in the data that we have, update it where it's needed. But we're also going to use GIS to map out our 10-year CIP so that we can identify, if we have a project in the same area scheduled maybe for 2 years later, should we push up that in the schedule, push something back, making sure that we are not resurfacing a road prior to a water main replacement. Some of the basics like that. But just using that tool and looking at our data and seeing how we can create efficiencies as we project out our CIP program over 10 years. As John already talked about, Public Works is going to be involved in the clubhouse design and construction. Been getting up to speed with Stella and John. And really from Public Works aspect, we're going to try to help out with the schedule and budget of the overall project. Also next year, we're going to begin the development of a climate action plan. This won't start until kind of the tail end of the comprehensive plan, and try to take some of that momentum as that plan is winding down to start up the climate action plan. But with it, what we're looking to obtain is some very realistic goals that the village can, act on in regards to climate resiliency. We'll incorporate that into our CIP plan and what we're doing. And I guess it's a good segue to kind of talk about the next bullet point, which I found.
So EV fleet, as we potentially want to move in that direction, we need to do an evaluation of the village hall and the public works garage to see if, the capacities are there and the infrastructure's there. So we'll use, electrical engineer to come in and do an evaluation and take a look at that and make suggestions on how we should upgrade. At this time, if we wanted to purchase 5 vehicles in 25, we just don't have the infrastructure to understand what we need, the type and size of stations and whatnot. As with every budget year, we're always evaluating staffing levels with service delivery, needs of community, make sure they're being met in the most cost-effective manner. Good example would be snow and ice control. We're always looking at the different facets of that and make some changes. At the end of 2024, we'll be negotiating a contract with the bargaining unit. We successfully did it in 22. We anticipate the same outcome, fingers crossed. Water rate study, I think we've covered that. I mean, the only comment I can make there, I think for the last 30, 40 years, local government, villages, they just haven't charged enough for their water rates, and we're all starting to feel that pain, so need to make those changes. And then again, Chris Callaway, our facilities manager, he'll be working cooperatively with other village staff to make sure all those second floor renovations are done correctly. Questions from anybody?
So a few highlights from our first ever development services department budget. We have 3 full-time employees and total department budget of just under $900,000. A lot of what we're planning on doing in the next year is dependent on the outcome of the comprehensive plan. That's really going to provide us a vision and some guidance for what direction we want to take with some of the programs that we are anticipating. That comprehensive plan, we're about 18 months into it right now. It's expected to be a 2-year project. It's all done, so we're looking at wrapping that up springtime, late spring, early summer of next year. This will be the last of the funds that were from our agreement from 2 years ago with our consultant on that. Coming out of that, we do expect to undertake some code updates. Really the scope of that is going to depend on the direction we get from the planning commission and the village board with the comprehensive plan, zoning code, subdivision code. Also, we are now due for updating the new suite of ICC building codes. That actually be the 2024. It says 2023, but actually 2024 version of those codes, which we expect to come out in the middle of next year. And this time for us to update those. And then finally, evaluate contractual services model for plan review and inspection. This is something we've already touched on. Our costs for this have significantly increased over the last few years for a variety of reasons. We anticipate in 2024 to take a very close look at all of our options for that in detail, whether that be testing market on other third-party contractors or bringing some or all of that in-house. That will have an impact on the budget going forward, but that is in the works for next year. Is there any questions? Any better, anything else?
So our brand new public works director made a point that I had not heard, that we should, that's clearly a good idea. We should pay attention to the when we're staging stuff so we don't do the street and then rip it up and put in a new water. Very excellent point. Related to that, in your area, if we're thinking about changing our codes, we ought to be thinking about whether we should. There are a number of board members, including me, who have been talking about home rule. I'm not positive when that's going to happen, and if it will happen. We certainly would need to educate the community, so it's not going to be tomorrow. we may not want to spend a bunch of money changing our codes with all the limitations of being a non-home rule community, and then become home rule, and then have to go to our lawyers and say, okay, now we need to fix it to match what we just did. So we should be thinking about that.
Yeah, I would say on the building code side of things, that is less likely to be an issue. I think certainly as we look at the outcome of the comp plan and zoning code changes and those types of things, you're absolutely right. I think we're probably ambitiously 6 months out from the comprehensive plan finalizing. And so we may know more relative to your point on home rule by that point, and that can play into our timeline.
So, as the comprehensive plan is thinking about, okay, this might be a good change, and that might be a good change, we just flag the ones we can do now and the ones that we can't do now.
Absolutely.
That'll also help educate all of us, including the residents, as to whether home rule is something they're interested in. I confess, I've been interested for 40 years, but, okay.
Just to follow up on the building code, I would hope that we look at the entire suite of ICC building codes, including the green code, as well as the historic preservation rehabilitation code. It's important for our historic preservation program, and it's also good for our sustainability efforts. And there's a great national model out there.
Development services. Taylor? Golf fund. Golf.
Golf club budget. The golf club does have 6 full-time employees, and we spiked up to about 55 in season with all the seasonal help that we hire. Everyone's been talking about the clubhouse, and we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into the CIP, but it's obviously an all-in project, working with every department and using the expertise that we have in-house to make it the best possible clubhouse in the galaxy.
His ears just inexplicably started ringing.
On budget, we have driving range improvements also that we'll be talking about in capital. The continuous cart path project is ongoing. Next year, we will finish all of the paths, and they have all been done in-house that we spread out over 5 years. It's brought us a lot of incremental revenue being able to open during rain events. So thank you to Dave Arden and his staff for all of that. We are going to start beginning to develop an RFP for a restaurant provider for the new clubhouse. Work will be done on that in the off season right now. Hopefully we will attract someone that is on the same kind of level as our clubhouse will be, and perhaps create a partnership where they may be able to share in some of the costs of the equipment for the kitchen. That's the highlights of the budget, and everything else will go over in capital.
Any questions on golf? Okay, moving right along. Okay, so if I can draw your attention to page 196 in the budget, that's where our capital or community investment program starts, and you see the first portion of the program includes a general overview of the infrastructure that we are maintaining. Pages 198 to 202, those are the fold-out pages, give you every detail that you would want to know about the next 10 years. Every project is outlined, the category that it falls in, and the funding source that we're proposing. Also, in the last fold-out page is the financing plan that we had discussed earlier in the presentation. That would include the proposed financing of how we would pay for all of the infrastructure improvements as outlined. Page 203 specifically is, and we'll go through this in detail, so don't worry so much about it. Gives the entire layout of what we are proposing, the $21 million in 2024, all of the capital expenses by fund. In total, the 10-year program includes $77.4 million over the next 10 years. This is, as I mentioned earlier, a significant increase from last year's 10-year CIP, largely given to the addition of the golf clubhouse that has not historically been included in that total, and also the water infrastructure improvements, those enhancements in the out years that we believe to be more accurate. In 2024, again, that $20 million that's outlined, we'll go through those projects, especially some of the large ones in more detail in just a moment. But I do want to highlight, along with the financing plan, that we do have some significant grant and private funding that will be supplementing our bond issues and our fund reserves that we're spending on this capital. Included in the agenda for next month, right, will be the MWRD intergovernmental.
Or this week.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thursday night, there is an intergovernmental agreement with MWRD on the proposed stormwater improvement. You'll see that's in the budget for the full freight of the $3 million, but we are eligible to get up to $1 million back from them on that project. So that's significant private funding there. The famous Safe Routes to School program, we have that in there. The $118,000 represents the grant amount, which unfortunately does not increase with the cost of the project. So that doesn't cover the entire cost of the project anymore, but nevertheless, it is a significant contribution towards those improvements. Also, there's $250,000 that we are anticipating supplementing the driving range netting project in the golf club fund. That is a private donor from the Friends of the Glencoe Golf Club. So certainly a success story there to offset the cost of that project. And then there are also going to be a number of unknown donations related to the clubhouse. So those will be yet to be seen as we get farther along in that process. Certainly will be a significant initiative of Stella to continue to work with the Friends to generate donations to offset the cost of that project. Details of the financing plan, again, I want to caution not to panic because it's going to change every year as we evaluate the 10-year plan. But as we have laid out the project expenses for the next 10 years, what we are anticipating are additional revenue bond issues in calendar years 26, 29, 32. That's not that far off from what we were anticipating last year. The size and scale of those bond issues have been adjusted to accommodate the new cost structure. I believe the 2032 bond issue is new this year as compared to last year, which you would expect as we roll forward the plan every 10 years, we will pick up new bond issues to cover future improvements. We have potential referendum bond issues in calendar year 2024, next year, 25, 27, 2030, 2033. I will outline those just briefly. 24, we talked about a little bit. The referendum has already been approved in 21 and 23, so there's 3 million out of that 21 authority that's remaining, another 7 million out of the 15 that was authorized for the golf club. We're deliberately issuing the golf club bonds in installments because we are not aware of how much private fundraising will happen. So if you remember, we issued 3 million for the golf club this year, feels like last year already. And we'll be issuing 7 million in anticipation to cover the engineering costs, all of the design work, and then the eventual planned groundbreaking next year. That last installment is tentatively planned for 5 million in 2025, with the idea that that will be scalable depending on the ultimate project cost that we see. So that's why we're issuing back-to-back 24, 25. 27 would be with our normal 3-year cycle. If you remember, usually with the CIP, we try to issue bonds. We have 3 years to spend those bonds, so we try to stagger them in 3-year increments. That doesn't mean that we have to go out to referendum every 3 years. We can go out to referendum and then you have 5 years to issue the bonds from the date that the referendum is approved. So 2027 and 2030, 2033 would be another issue that we would pick up just because we're extending that 10-year issue. One thing I would note about the revenue bond issues, again, this kind of goes hand in hand with the water rate study. The idea behind the revenue bonds is that those would be self-sustaining, so that we would have a rate structure that would support that. Even though we issue general obligation bonds, they are alternate revenue. They are backed by the full faith and credit of the village, so we get a lower interest rate, but they are they call them a double barrel bond. You can also support them with revenue. So the idea is that we will abate that tax levy associated with the bonds, pay it back through water revenue. And then the referendum bonds would be the one that would actually hit the bottom line of the property tax levy. Any questions before I go on? Other items I just want to note that we've included in the 10-year CIP, but funding is not allocated. There's a lot of moving parts with these still, that we still have to have some significant discussions starting in 2024. We'll have some large conversations about the water fund, infrastructure-wise. So the water treatment plant upgrade, replacement, where the board decides to head with that. That's kind of on the radar, still included in the 10-year CIP, so we don't lose sight of it. But there are some significant discussions that have to happen before we assign a number to that. Same thing with the potential public works garage location, waiting to hear where the comprehensive plan lands. We're still about 6 months out to completing that. I would suspect that there would be more information that would come up about that later on, but it's still something that we just want to make sure we keep on the radar. Okay. So moving along into, this is again, page 203 in your budget. We'll start with the general fund projects and just highlight a couple of the large ones for you. Following page 203, the CIP narrative, each project has a detailed explanation if you haven't gone through them. Every detail that you'd like to know about the project should be included, hopefully, but we're happy to answer any questions as well.
I will say we've touched on a number of these as we've gone through. And so I'll leave it in the board's hands, whether you want us to outline anything specifically relative to any of these in the general fund, and we'll go through the 4 fund areas. Happy
specifically? Anybody?
So I have a question. Concerns the electronic speed monitoring signs and crosswalk improvements. That's on page 252. Are we going to do something or something more at the crosswalk between the train station over across Green Bay Road, the train station to Tudor Court on the way to Writers Theater, which seems like one of the more potentially dangerous spots in town?
Yes, it is. I agree. The lighting at midnight makes no sense.
Quickly jumping to her mapping software.
Yeah. No, I know it's
Contextual.
I drive past it every day on the way home, and I drive very slow because I agree with the elevated planters at the sidewalk entrance. It's hard to see if pedestrians are there.
So, and I just couldn't tell from this write-up whether we're doing more there. And this looks to me like a good spot for you push the button and the.
So we have identified 3 intersections for the crosswalk beacons. I don't know that those are finalized. I think we could take into consideration the one in Green Bay Road that you're talking about across from the train station. But once those are installed, they will be permanent features of that crosswalk. Versus the electronic monitoring speed signs, those are movable and mobile. We can move them as needed, but.
I think President Rowan, to answer your question more directly, the 3 locations that we have listed here could potentially be expanded to include that 4th location. The three locations are ones that were spotlighted in the Safe Routes to School program. So that's at the Take-If Center, that crossing on Green Bay Road, which has always been less than ideal. The other two are completely unsignalized right now. One of them is Bluff and Bluff and Dundee, and the other is South Avenue and Green Bay. I would anticipate if we can get those three done, we will look into whether we can add the fourth intersection or the fourth crossing to that. But those have been high priority ones for a number of years, and we just haven't been able to address them.
None of us, whenever somebody comes in with any complaint, punchline is children will die, no matter what the subject. And usually I think, yeah, not really. But with these, that's actually potentially true. In the case of the train station, it also might be geezers like me going to the Writers Theater. But we should, so I would, let's see if we can squeeze out.
One thing we'll look at I don't know that we have this at hand, but we'll look at it as we work to finalize the budget for December, what the cost would be to include that crossing as well in this allocation. And if we think we can swing it, we'll add it in.
And I don't know if there's a low-tech temporary improvement that can be made, but one of the things that I find is driving in night, and I have good night vision. But the lighting system that's been installed with the very bright lights, your eye sees the light, does not see the person or the dog that's all dark standing right there.
Yeah. Are you talking about the low bollards?
Yeah.
The lower bollards that are
The
in
lighting on it in terms of how it hits the driver, if we could do something, put something over it so that it's reflecting on the person, so you see somebody standing there as opposed to shining in your eyes.
I'll answer most of them the other night. Thank you, Bill. I have a couple of questions on the new side. I noticed in our road street resurfacing, our recurring street resurfacing program, we're delaying the resurfacing for 4 years, but then we're like catching up later. Is there a reason why we're doing that? Are we just so busy now?
Those have historically been funded through the bond funding.
Oh, is it? Okay.
So kind of putting it on pause, we've upped our street patching.
Okay.
So we can do some work in between, but yeah, just historically it's been funded with building up the MFT and then also bringing in the bond funding.
Mentioned using GIS to help better take decisions in how we upgrade our facilities. Do we have, are we looking at new software? Do we have the software we need, or do we think about having better asset management software? Is this something we're talking about as we talk about technological improvements?
I would say we could do better with asset management. And I think as we build a better data set through some of the work that we're going to do during the course of this year, that is an important component. I will say the village is a founding member of the GIS consortium. Yeah, we've been working with them since 1999. It started as 4 communities, and I think it's 39 communities now that have all, how many? 43? Holy cow. That have all kind of developed unified GIS programs utilizing this similar platform. And it's very robust. In fact, we're hopefully testing a component where we'll be able to track our snowplows through town and show that real time online if people are interested. So when they call to say, no one's been down my street in 7 hours, we can say, in fact, they've been down your street 3 times in the last 7 hours. That all being said, I think we will continue to look at asset management as how we can improve what we have to make it more robust and useful to us, particularly for CIP planning.
it would be a good thing if we
Yeah.
needed to.
For sure.
Chairman?
Yep.
Yeah, as we're looking at Green Bay Road and Park intersection, even equal to or parallel to the discussion of the lights, we did have a pretty bad accident there this year. And taking a look at that whole intersection might be valuable to us. Two ways. One is trying to encourage people to cross for parking on the other side of the tracks, as they say. Also for safety, one example I was thinking of recently was what they've done in Wilmette, where they actually have a physical barrier for the turn lanes, try to channelize that traffic so people don't try to beat the train or go around somebody else.
Yeah.
Like, just something, it's kind of, while you're
that's
looking at it,
very thoughtful.
that'd be a big thing to do.
I know that's come up in the comp plan discussions, particularly kind of the creating an easier and safer and more visual connection between both sides of Green Bay Road. And I think, yeah.
Okay. Anything else? It seems like Joe dropped off or just.
Joe did drop off about half an hour ago. He indicated earlier that he was going to have to leave after about 90 minutes.
General fund, water fund, capital. Any questions on any of these?
Need a mandate, talk about for sanitary. Isn't sure what that was. Mentioned in the beginning of the slide. I see that it's ICP.
James,
That's the MWRD.
IEPA sanitary mandate. I thought maybe it was referenced earlier and I wasn't sure. We're talking about service.
I think it is misplaced.
Okay.
Or lead service
We're
lines.
talking about sanitary and then I got
Yeah.
confused. Okay.
That may have been.
Is MWRD a service line?
No. It's sanitary. Yeah. IEPA is lead service line. Okay. Because we like to use acronyms in government to confuse ourselves. Okay.
Okay, so if there are no more questions on the 10-year CIP, just reviewing next steps. So this coming Thursday, we'll be having the property tax levy hearing at the beginning of the village board meeting, or at the end of the village board meeting. And then in December, we'll take all of your feedback today, incorporate it into the final budget document, and then there will be a series of things that will come before you in December. Not the least of which, the budget document itself, the appropriations ordinance, because even though we do adopt a line item budget, we are legally organized that we are required to adopt an appropriations ordinance, which is 110% of the budget. That is our legal level of spending. And then we will also include the final approval on the property tax levy, the multi-year contract approval. Those are ongoing contracts that we bring before you every year, just to remind you that we have these contracts in place. Calendar year 2024 fee and fine resolution, which will also be modified based off of tonight's discussion. And then any final calendar year 2023 budget amendments for those items that we didn't plan on this year, just truing up the budget to make sure that we haven't exceeded our legal level of authority there. And those will all be brought before you in December, just in the nick of time to file a property tax levy. Answer any other questions? Their formal presentation.
I'd like to thank staff for putting together this document. I don't know where you got these great pictures of the community, but it really livens it up. I really, really like that, and I feel that we've got as much information as we can handle. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I
Very
have to
helpful.
shout out to Sandy Hansel, our communications manager, who
All
designed all of those cover pages.
It's
She did a
very-
fantastic job.
Very, very readable, and a great resource for us.
I was saying to my wife, actually, I said, if you want to know what's going on in Glencoe, in almost any department, about almost anything that's important, pick this up and peruse it, and you'll probably find information that's important about that in this document. It's quite amazing. Kudos to the many, many people that have contributed and the people that have compiled it and edited it. It's very, very impressive. The other thing I want to say is the presentation tonight was excellent. And I love the fact that it wasn't just, as well as you do, that it wasn't just you, that we got to hear from new folks we've heard from for quite a while before, et cetera. I mean, this really, I think, made it more informative, more interesting. So thank you for staying late and putting in the time and effort to prepare and to do all this. We're very lucky, the village is very lucky to have you. Thank you. And with that, I think we're at the end of our agenda. So are there any other non-agenda items that anyone would like to bring up? I guess not.
Let me just say, this will only be 10 seconds, it's related. I agree, great job. I agree, we're lucky to have you. I agree with everything. And I just say, Phil told me that he thought this meeting would be 2.5 hours. So, and I just want to repeat, because everybody knows this is really important to me. Brevity is the source of all speaker points. It's like the guy at the Chicago Marathon who beat the record by a lot. You just did that. Great. We should aim for that all the time. And it doesn't just serve us. In my view, it serves the community. We're going to see it, I think, Thursday night. So, great.
All right, and with that, not seeing anyone else, then may I have a motion to adjourn, please? Second. All in favor? Aye. We're adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you all. We'll see you, we start 5